Los Angeles woke up to fear one summer morning in 1985. Doors slammed shut, windows were nailed, and families prayed through sleepless nights. A shadow slipped into homes, leaving behind death and satanic signs. People whispered one name, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas in 1960. His early life was filled with chaos. His father was short-tempered and sometimes violent, while his mother worked long hours. As a boy, Richard suffered several head injuries, which doctors later said may have affected his behavior. But the most dangerous influence came from his older cousin Miguel. Miguel had served in Vietnam and returned home with photographs of women he claimed to have abused and killed overseas. He showed these pictures to Richard, who was just a child. Richard listened, absorbed, and learned. Violence became part of his imagination, stitched into his understanding of the world. By his teenage years, Richard was experimenting with drugs, first marijuana, then LSD and cocaine. He drifted away from school and into petty crimes. Teachers described him as distant, distracted, and often absent. Friends later recalled he was fascinated with dark symbols, Satan, and the idea of power through fear. At home, things were no better. His parents couldn't control him, and Richard found freedom in the streets. He began sneaking into houses, not always to steal but to watch people as they slept. He learned how to move quietly, how to test doors and windows, and how to disappear before dawn. These break-ins were practice for something much worse. At first it looked like a teenager rebelling, but underneath, he was preparing himself for the crimes that would soon terrify California. By the late 1970s, Richard left Texas for California. He worked odd jobs, sometimes in hotels where he watched how security systems worked, how guests behaved, and how to move through buildings unnoticed. He often stayed in cheap motels, living on the edge of poverty and drifting through the streets at night. Los Angeles in the 1980s was a place of energy and extremes. Music clubs, neon signs, crowded highways, and neighborhoods stretching into endless suburbs. Yet crime was rising. Gangs, drugs, and predators filled the same streets as commuters and families. Amid this chaos, a young drifter like Richard could blend in without question. He grew thinner, more hollow-eyed. He rarely brushed his teeth, giving him a breath survivors later described as foul. He spent nights wandering, high on cocaine, searching for unlocked doors. He worshipped Satan, sometimes drawing pentagrams on motel walls. His hunger for violence deepened. Neighbors would see him wandering, shoeless or with a bag slung over his shoulder, but no one thought much of it. In a city of millions, he was just another restless figure moving through the night. But in his mind, he was already building the legend he wanted. Someone who terrified not just victims, but entire communities. I close this part of the diary, knowing that the pieces are all here: a broken childhood, violent influences, drug addiction, and growing obsession with darkness. The next page of this diary takes us into 1984, when these shadows stepped into the light of California nights, and the first victim felt the arrival of the Night Stalker. The year 1984 in Los Angeles felt ordinary at first. Bright mornings, crowded freeways, neighborhoods alive with summer sounds. But that illusion was fragile. One evening, a scream cut through the night, and everything began to change. It started with 79-year-old Jenny Vinsow. She lived alone in her Los Angeles apartment. In June 1984, she was found murdered, stabbed, her throat slashed. At first, detectives wondered if it was a burglary gone wrong. But the violence seemed personal, vicious. Drawers were pulled open, yes, but it wasn't about property. It was about control. The police had no suspect. The city carried on, but quietly, fear began to hum. People started checking their locks. Neighbors whispered, but there was no name yet. Just a sense that someone had walked into a stranger's home and left death behind. Everything looked normal, until one neighbor noticed a strange detail. Jenny's apartment had no sign of forced entry. Whoever killed her might have just walked right in. For months, there was silence. Los Angeles moved into 1985 unaware that the man who killed Jenny Vincow was still walking its streets. Ramirez spent those months drifting, living in motels, stealing cars, using cocaine, and studying neighborhoods late at night. By March 1985, he struck again. Maria Hernandez was returning to her condo in Rosemead when Ramirez followed her inside. He raised his gun and fired. The bullet hit her keys, sparing her life. But inside, her roommate, Dale Okazaki, wasn't so fortunate. Within the same night, Ramirez attacked another woman, Tsai Lian Yu, pulling her from her car and shooting her. These attacks sent a shock through the city. 2 neighborhoods, 2 murders, 1 survivor. The randomness was the most terrifying part. There was no pattern. Of wealth or age, anyone could be next. Detectives began to connect dots. Similar caliber bullets, similar descriptions from survivors. A tall, gaunt man with bad teeth, dark eyes, and a chilling stare. He seemed to appear and vanish like a shadow. Detectives thought they had it solved, but one clue said otherwise. Shoe prints found at one scene didn't match any suspect in their files. The city's fear deepened. Locks were doubled, windows nailed. The man now called the Valley Intruder had earned a darker title. By the summer of 1985, the press gave him a name that would never be forgotten: the Night Stalker. The spring of 1985 turned into a season of dread. On March 17th, Maria Hernandez survived an attack that killed her roommate, Dale Okazaki. Just hours later, another woman, Tsai Lian Yu, was shot and killed. These rapid strikes set the tone. Ramirez could appear anywhere, any night, and disappear just as quickly. Then came more horrors. On March 27th, Vincent Zazara, 64, and his wife Maxine, 44, were attacked in their Whittier home. Vincent was shot in his sleep. Maxine was brutally assaulted and stabbed. Ramirez mutilated her body and left behind satanic symbols. For detectives, it was the moment they realized this wasn't just a burglar or killer. It was someone obsessed with terror. At first, investigators thought it might be a robbery spree. But then, the cruelty and symbols left behind told them otherwise. In May 1985, Ramirez entered the home of Bill and Lillian Doe. Bill, 66, was shot in his bed, while Lillian, 56, was assaulted. Ramirez left her alive, a rare decision that provided police with another witness. Her description matched others: a tall, thin man with bad teeth and dark, cold eyes. June brought more victims: the Cannon family in Arcadia. 15-year-old Whitney survived by pretending to be asleep, while Ramirez killed her mother. Survivors described his mocking laughter, his voice invoking Satan, his enjoyment of fear. The press now called him the Night Stalker. The name fit perfectly. He attacked in the darkest hours, slipping through windows, kicking down doors, leaving behind scenes of horror that looked more like nightmares than crimes. But investigators soon discovered something that didn't make sense. He left shoe prints, clear imprints from a size 11-12 Avia sneaker. No other crimes in California had ever tied to that brand before. By summer, panic ruled Los Angeles. July was one of the bloodiest months. Ramirez struck the home of 16-year-old Whitney Bennett, beating her with a tire iron. Miraculously, she survived. On July 2nd, he murdered a couple in Arcadia. On July 5th, he killed in Sierra Madre. On July 7th, he struck Monterey Park. The pattern was relentless, different. Neighborhoods, random victims, no mercy. The brutality was shocking. Sometimes Ramirez shot victims, other times he bludgeoned them or used a knife. He sexually assaulted women, mocked them, and forced them to swear allegiance to Satan. The randomness meant no one felt safe, young or old, rich or poor, married, couples or single women. At first, families believed locking windows was enough, but Ramirez broke locks, cut screens, and pried open doors. Nowhere felt safe. The fear spread beyond Los Angeles. In August 1985, Ramirez drove north to San Francisco. On August 17th, he killed Peter Pan, 66, and assaulted his wife, Barbara, in their home. The city was shaken. Officials feared the Night Stalker had widened his hunting ground. But it wasn't just the killings, it was the psychological warfare. Ramirez whispered about Satan. He drew pentagrams on walls, on bodies, even on his own hand. Survivors said, he demanded they swear to the devil. He wanted not only to kill but to corrupt, to terrify. California was paralyzed. Gun shops sold out. Hardware stores couldn't keep locks in stock. Families slept with baseball bats or knives nearby. Parents wouldn't let children play outside. The Night Stalker was no longer just a criminal. He was a living nightmare invading the most private space. The home. The police thought they were closing in, but a shocking twist was waiting. Ramirez was about to make a mistake that would finally turn the city against him. The Los Angeles Police Department had faced difficult cases before, but nothing like this. By mid-1985, they knew they were dealing with a single predator, one who killed at random and left behind horror instead of clear motives. Detectives from multiple counties, Los Angeles, San Gabriel Valley, San Francisco, began working together. Evidence piled up: bullet casings, shoe prints, witness descriptions. One thing stood out: the distinct Avia sneaker print left at several crime scenes. It was a size 11-1-2, and investigators learned only a small number of those shoes had been sold in the U.S. That detail gave them hope. One day, they could tie the shoe to a man. But frustration mounted. Survivors described a gaunt man with decayed teeth, long hair, and dark eyes. Yet there were no fingerprints, no name, no place to start. Every time they thought they had a lead, it dissolved. At first, detectives believed they were close, but then evidence kept slipping, like chasing a shadow that moved faster than their maps. Media pressure exploded. The name Night Stalker filled headlines, and the public demanded answers. News stations described his methods in chilling detail, which some officers feared only encouraged Ramirez. Families held vigils, communities formed neighborhood watches, and gun sales skyrocketed. Mistakes were made. In San Francisco, after the murder of Peter and Barbara Pan, police leaked information about the Avia shoe prints. Ramirez read the reports and immediately stopped wearing those shoes, switching his footwear. That single leak erased one of the strongest links they had. Detectives were furious. Still, they pressed forward. A composite sketch circulated: long face, bad teeth, messy hair. Calls poured in, but none led to an arrest. The fear grew worse, because now people recognized the Night Stalker's face, but he was still free to kill. Viewers, stay with me, because what happened next will surprise you. The clue that finally exposed Ramirez was not a fingerprint or a weapon, but something far more ordinary. The break came in late August 1985. Ramirez left a stolen orange Toyota in Los Angeles. Police recovered it, and inside they found a single fingerprint on a mirror. It was run through the system, and at last, a name came back: Richard Ramirez, a drifter with a criminal record of car theft and burglary. Detectives quickly pulled his mugshot and released it to the press. Newspapers printed his photo in bold headlines. His face was on every TV screen in California. For the first time, the hunter became the hunted. When Ramirez returned to Los Angeles by bus on August 31st, he noticed people staring at him. At first, he didn't understand why. Then he saw his own face on the front page of a newspaper. Panic spread across his features. He tried to run, attempted to steal a car, but the community had had enough. Residents chased him, beat him, and held him down until police arrived. The police thought they might never catch him. But a shocking twist was waiting. His capture came not from detectives, but from ordinary citizens who refused to let fear rule their streets any longer. The arrest of Richard Ramirez in August 1985 ended the Night Stalker's reign of terror on the streets. But it opened a new chapter in the courtroom. As he was led into custody, reporters swarmed. The same face that had haunted California in sketches now appeared in clear photographs. He was no longer a shadow. He was flesh and blood, and the world wanted to know who he really was. The trial took years to begin. Evidence was enormous: witness testimonies, ballistic reports, shoe prints, DNA, and stories from survivors. But Ramirez didn't behave like an ordinary defendant. He strutted into courtrooms smirking, flashing a pentagram drawn on his hand. He shouted, "Hail Satan!" He seemed to enjoy the chaos, almost feeding on the gasps and whispers. Families of victims sat in the gallery, holding photographs of loved ones, listening to prosecutors describe brutal details. Some survivors testified, their voices shaking but determined to tell the truth. Detectives laid out the evidence piece by piece, weaving together the story of dozens of attacks across Los Angeles and San Francisco. At first, some wondered if the jury would ever sit through such a massive case. But every shocking moment in court only hardened their resolve. In September 1989, after years of delays, the verdict came. Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The jury recommended the death penalty. When the judge pronounced the sentence, Ramirez showed no remorse. Instead, he mocked the court, saying, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." For the families, justice felt heavy. Relief was mixed with grief. They had a name, a face, and a sentence, but nothing could bring back their loved ones. Still, California could finally breathe. The Night Stalker would never again walk their streets. Ramirez was sent to San Quentin State Prison, placed on death row. Even there, he remained a figure of fascination. Some disturbed admirers even sent him letters, drawn by his notoriety. But behind the prison walls, his power was gone. The man who once controlled nights in Los Angeles now lived in a cage, awaiting an execution that would never come. The police thought the case was over, but a shocking twist was waiting. Ramirez would die not by execution, but by illness decades later. The case of the Night Stalker ended in the courtroom, but its memory never left California. Richard Ramirez was sentenced to death in 1989, yet his execution never came. He spent decades on death row at San Quentin State Prison. In 2013, he died of cancer at age 53, long before his sentence could be carried out. For many families, his death brought little comfort. Justice felt incomplete, but at least the man who had once controlled nights in Los Angeles was gone forever. His crimes changed the way people in California thought about safety. Locks became stronger, communities became more watchful, and the memory of his shadow became a permanent warning. Ramirez's story is solved. He was captured, tried, and punished, but the scars remain. Survivors still carry their memories, and the families of victims live with the losses that no sentence can repair. The Night Stalker may be gone, but his reign of fear is carved into history. And so, my diary closes with this truth. Richard Ramirez was one man, but for a year he controlled the nights of California with fear, violence, and evil symbols. Today we call him the Night Stalker, but at his core, he was a predator who thrived on terror. Even though the case is solved, the questions linger. How did a boy from El Paso become one of America's most infamous killers? Could he have been stopped earlier? What makes some people choose darkness so completely? What do you think? Was Ramirez simply a product of his violent upbringing, or Did something far deeper drive his obsession with fear and death? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, subscribe for more true crime diaries where we walk step by step through the cases that shaped history.